Trey Reckling with the Academy of Cannabis Science. We're here today with Noel Davenport with Capes and Powers, a technology business solutions company. And I'm going to ask him to tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Thanks for having me here, Trey. Business technology solutions is anything inside of your business that has technology. Sometimes it just comes down to being a power button. But it's everything from the data entering or leaving your building through your internet service provider to the technology that you hold in your hand or you type on for your computer, your tablet, your phone. And then the stuff in the middle, which is usually a server, whether it's on premise or in the cloud, a lot of the security appliance, firewalls, modems, and infrastructure is not just wired anymore. There's a lot of wireless infrastructure, and so we do it all, and we specialize in compliance-ridden environments such as healthcare, financial, and cannabis just makes the most sense.
Gotcha. So in our courses, frequently we'll talk to students about security. Typically when we're talking about security, though, we're talking cameras, situational awareness, what are security protocols, what to do if things go wrong. But you're talking about a whole nother thing that maybe we haven't gone into a great deal, and that's why it's nice to have this conversation today. So what type of data is collected or could be collected on me as a cannabis consumer?
That's a great question, and I think what you need to understand is what you're probably viscerally aware of. When you go into a retail cannabis shop in Washington, you have to produce identification. So at that point, they know your name, they know your address, they know your date of birth, and that's at the very least. They could have other information depending on what you may have for restrictions or if you have a motorcycle endorsement, but you can imagine they could get a lot of information for what you're producing. The other piece of information that they're collecting about you potentially is payment, something financially, using a credit card. And there's some loopholes where a credit card might be purchasing some type of cryptocurrency, which is technically paying for the product, or you're using an ATM with your debit card and you're extracting cash. But at some point, somebody somewhere with that financial information knows who you are, knows your credit information, knows who you're banking with, knows your balance. And then finally, there is prevalent amount of retailers that, because you have a lobby type of environment and there's a little bit of waiting going on, they'll use either a free Wi-Fi where you'll get onto the Wi-Fi and they can harvest information that way, or they'll have maybe a frequent buyers program and you're giving your information, usually it's phone number, email, and your name. But collecting all of that data means that they have a huge amount of information, and if you start to reconcile what you might be transmitting on that free public Wi-Fi, it could be your social media. Now they know what your interests are, who your friends are, what you did last week, what events you plan on going to. So just imagining everything that you put over that free Wi-Fi is essentially a toll bridge to the open internet that they get to decide as the gatekeepers of that free Wi-Fi what they do with your information.
So, Noel, that's kind of daunting. That was a laundry list of things that some people might have not considered, and I know we still have some inexperienced shoppers, new consumers to cannabis, people who are even concerned about where their car is parked in the parking lot for fear that their neighbors, employer, or somebody else might see them buying cannabis. So we don't want to make people paranoid, but help us understand what kind of data is collected. What sort of thing is being gathered about me as a shopper?
That's a great question, and how do we talk about information without making people paranoid? I think is understanding what the facts are, and a lot of that question is, what are the individual policies of that establishment that you're in? What are they doing with the information? How are they collecting the information? When they do collect information, how long are they keeping it? If they do keep that information, is it going to be separate from maybe the payment processing of whatever they use, be it a credit card or some type of other financial identifiable information? I think that's where the question really needs to start is, what are these individual establishments, the retail locations, what are they doing?
And so it should be obvious, right? So if I plan to go into a store and I'm going to use cash to be as discreet as possible, they're going to scan my ID at the door, I make a cash purchase, I'm out the door, they don't know who I am, right?
Well, do they? They know enough that you're of age, and they found out that you were of age by scanning a document that is probably not falsified. And if all of that information is true, they now know who you are, they know where you live, they know at least your date of birth, and anything else that might be on your license. They could also have information of whether you have a suspended license or whether you ride or drive a motorcycle. They can harvest a lot of information just off of that one piece of information that you've given to them. I think the other thing to keep in mind is what are we giving digitally? And in a lot of these retail shops, they are offering free public Wi-Fi. But please know that whenever you get onto some type of free public Wi-Fi, there's a toll. You're paying a toll to whoever's providing that Wi-Fi to the internet, and we all pay our ISPs at home, and it's not free. So when you get on that free Wi-Fi, they're going to be collecting that information. What they do with it, again, is the policy of the individual business, but what they would have access to is anything that you use. So if you get on your social media, they'll know who your friends are, they'll know what your interests are. And the argument for collecting this data, which there is a positive side to this yin-yang, it could create a better buying experience. So if I am a retailer and I can tell that you are one of my great customers, you come to me quite frequently because I could see how often you come, and you have a habit of buying certain types of products, maybe that would lend me to cater my store, my entire store, to you, my focus customer. So it could give you as a customer a better experience. At the same time, even if their intentions are good, where are they storing this data that nefarious entities, or if there was a shift in policy that suddenly made this newly legalized substance illegal again, that data could be harvested against you.
Gotcha. And so I without question, gave my phone number to one of the retailers I go to. I get a weekly notice of what's on sale that week. Nothing very different than what I might get with my groceries, but you bring up a good point on that. So how they're storing that phone number, the name associated with that, it could be in peril if I don't ask more questions.
Well, let's say that you never even got onto their Wi-Fi, you never gave away your social media information, but they have your name and your phone number. Probably have your address from your ID. And you'd be surprised, maybe you've done this before, but if you go just Google somebody's phone number, just put into a random search, or you go to a social media and you put in the search somebody's phone number, you are very likely to find that individual. So just be careful of the information that you give. Also be aware of the multiple data points that people can be collecting from. If you're using payment, they have that data and information. If you're giving identification, they have that data and identification. And then if you're getting on the Wi-Fi, you're opening yourself up to a whole host of other opportunities. Again, those opportunities could be used against you, or they could be used for you.
And so that makes a lot of sense. And we, like we said, we don't want to create paranoid shoppers, but we always want to improve the buying experience, make smarter shoppers, because in our opinion, as educators, the smarter our consumers are, the more accountable they hold us behind the retail counter and those people who are producing products by asking better questions about how it's sourced, how it's grown, how it's packaged, and all that sort of thing. So how do I vet my retailer then? What's the litmus test to know if they've been thinking about these things?
The key to all beautiful education is asking questions and being produced an answer. You may not like the answer, they might not have an answer, but ask questions about policy. It really comes down to policy, what their practices are. So when somebody grabs your ID and they scan it, ask them what they're doing with the information. It's a fair enough question to ask. You just have to prove that you have to be in that store. Why are they scanning your ID? And when you go to pay, if you're using credit card and if they're using some type of cryptocurrency loophole to use your processing information, I would ask to see policy on that as well. And especially if you're going to get onto Wi-Fi, I would ask for their policy on what they're doing with any data that is harvested once you get on that Wi-Fi.
Fair enough. So a store who's thought enough to think about my security probably has a policy in place and should be proud of it enough to share it and be transparent, right?
I think transparency is where we're all trying to head, but it's such a new market with so many regulations that there's confusion in the marketplace, and it's a very competitive marketplace. So if you go to store A, B, and C, and you don't like their policies on data retention, go to store D, E, and F. They're going to have options for you, and you're going to eventually find a cannabis retailer that works very well for you. You like their product selection because it's in demand of the customer.
And it may be that I don't want to leave my store, but I want to have a nice, polite conversation with the manager and ask, if this is something that's in place or they're willing to put in place, because I want to continue to shop there. I don't want to demonize any stores, but maybe they haven't gotten to the point of thinking about working with somebody like you. So tell me, from a retailer perspective, why should they consider working with a group like Capes and Powers?
Well, let's take the retailer's perspective, but through the eyes of the consumer.
Okay.
So if somebody walks into the store and the individual has questions on their data policy, Capes and Powers is full service and will help them write that data policy on something that might cover whatever their liability and interests are, but at the same time giving a comfortable answer to whoever the consumer is that might want to get on the public Wi-Fi or understand where their data is being stored or understand how long their data is being stored and if it's being used for any marketing purposes, because that does need to be disclosed. We would help with making sure that the architecture is secure. So wherever they're scanning and storing the data, wherever they're processing the credit card information, if there's a Wi-Fi system that people are getting onto and they are harvesting that information, we would know that in transport, when it's getting to that final resting place of data storage, we know that it's safe all the way along the chain. I think it's common enough term, not too much tech jargon, but you want it to be encrypted to a very high level. There are standards for different data, for different encryption, and we make sure that those are done right. We make sure that the data is tagged and saved only the amount of time that the policy dictates, and we make sure that that is free and fair to everybody. And then the third thing specific to the Wi-Fi is that if retailers are going to offer free Wi-Fi as an environment, we can make sure that that process of getting on the Wi-Fi is secure. It's very convenient and easy to get onto that Wi-Fi. And once you're on that Wi-Fi, it's a good enough experience for the customer because they have great bandwidth, they're not going to go over their data usage, and we could collect information that could provide them a better retail experience next time. Some companies are using it as their new digital punch card. And you don't carry a card around, they don't look anything up, you just sign on to the Wi-Fi. And after 10 visits, for example, you get your 10% off.
Gotcha. Okay, so if, once again from the retailer perspective, if I didn't go with somebody like you, we know mistakes are money, and so how could doing something like this or not doing something like this cost me?
Well, three very dominant examples for any regulated industry right now. One is Crypto Locker is the most well known, but any type of ransomware which can get onto any technology device, it encrypts most of the data that's on that device and then, as the name indicates, holds it ransom. A desktop might be $500 to $1,000 ransom fee. But recently we're seeing in Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, all of the infrastructure of Atlanta was held ransom for, I think, somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. And that's a large amount of money, but relatively that's not a large amount of money to that business. Really what it did to Atlanta is I believe it shut down the entire infrastructure for 2 days, and then they were hobbling along for another 3 days, and I think it took them about 2 weeks to really get right, and there was a certain amount of data that they were never able to recover. So thinking about that on the terms of small business, that's a big ransom to have to pay. It also shuts down your business for a while, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get that data back. So that's one of the things that I would say you could have huge data loss, and it's an easy thing to recover from if you have the right tools in place. We're talking about a couple of $100 a month to make sure that if you were to have some type of ransomware experience, we'd have you completely recovered in about an hour and a half.
So it's insurance as much as it is a gate.
I would say that all type of backup, disaster, and business continuity, it's all insurance that if the worst were to happen, you can continue forward with the least amount of cost or downtime.
Gotcha.
I think the other area where time is money, or mistakes are money, is if you do lose some type of uptime in general, is just your business is able to function on all the technology that they have. Depending on where you're located, you might want to have redundant internet service providers. Maybe your one internet service provider is flaky in your area. If you lose internet connectivity, you're not able to have your security cameras running, your POS system is going to shut down, and just doing rough math, I think a lot of our cannabis shops are at least $1,000 an hour. And so if you're down for 1 hour, that pays for a lot of bandwidth that we could have had some redundancy.
Right.
And then the final piece is policy in trying to train and having some type of technology policy for your employees. Are your employees allowed to bring their mobile devices to work and get onto the company's Wi-Fi? If they do, are they getting on a segregated Wi-Fi that's not part of the main network? What's your mobile policy that if something's lost? Do you have mobile device management software, which is becoming more and more popular for us, that we can wipe a phone remotely so that if the asset's lost, none of the data is lost? And I think that's what we're really coming back to is protect your data. And your data is your data as an individual consumer, and your data as a business is your data to try to leverage in the best and most ethical ways possible.
Fantastic. Like you keep saying, it's collection of data is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how it's managed and protected, and that a lot of these customer rewards programs actually offer great rewards or some benefit and a good reason why somebody would want to consider it. Now, looking ahead, since this topic is kind of new for some folks, help us from your perspective, since you do this day in and day out. What's your crystal ball perspective? What's something that might be on the horizon that we should be checking out or paying attention to?
Just to really hammer at home how important data is for the consumer experience, and then we'll go back to the crystal ball. Any business is always looking for loyal customers, and that's usually at the essence of whatever some type of customer appreciation program is. And that's how we got here as an industry, is we had a critical mass of people that were going to be loyal customers of this industry, and they weren't patients, they were retail customers. And so with any industry, if you can anticipate a demand, that's good for everyone. Mm-hmm. So really, don't shy away from offering to your customers some type of patient or some type of don't fear offering to your customers some type of loyalty give back. Don't fear giving them free public Wi-Fi and harvesting that information and giving them a better experience, but also don't abuse it as a business. I think that's one thing that I would say. To get back to the crystal ball question, easily what I see is the normalization of this market. It's going to fall in line with other, very long-held regulated industries like financial, personal data as an industry. If you think about some of the credit bureaus, Equifax, for example,
Right.
what not to do. But I think especially with the medical and the parallels that the cannabis industry uses with the medical market of cannabis, it's going to fall in line with what the HIPAA, high-tech, and other healthcare regulations have dictated nationally. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the cannabis industry really does hit that national level, and what maybe the federal government rolls out, just like they have with financial markets, healthcare markets. So I see a lot of normalization that's going to be happening, and for the businesses, I think that they're going to realize that not just collecting the lowest amount of data that's required by the state for reporting to give back to the state. I think a lot of these businesses are going to mature and see the value in that data, and I hope that the end customer sees the value in providing that data, but in the most appropriate relationships where the policies are understood, where the data is trusted. And I think one thing that you've mentioned before is the image of the business. You want to make sure that you're doing right by your customers. You want to make sure that you're doing things ethically and legally. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. There's going to be some pitfalls along the way, but Capes and Powers is there to help.
Fantastic. And thanks for taking time today. We always try to bring a new angle into our students and ask them to consider tough questions, either to ask themselves, to ask customers, or to talk to the management of their shops about, so they can continuously improve their services and bring this industry up. So thank you guys for what you're doing and for taking time today.
Thank you, Trey.